The talk will unfold out of a few recent publications of mine. The kind of retrospective journey is a personal reflection on how particular concerns and concepts have emerged and become central in my work. Most of my work in interaction design over the last 2 decades is contextualized within a digital transformation of society, but also more broadly, fundamentally, rethinking the way in which we design in a post-industrial age. And by post-industrial, I mean an age when digital things come to express some form of agency. And because of that, in a way, in this sense, to also actively participate in the making of what we come up to experience as our reality. And examples of such things, which I have researched and designed for, are network communities in the mid-90s, online publics, very early platforms for user-generated content in the early 2000s, and recently connected products and AI-powered product service systems. All of these developments are powered clearly by advances in digital technology, and to design researchers, they speak of how in this post-industrial age, the act of design becomes at first more diffuse, then decentralized, and as we come to realize now, increasingly probabilistic. And so the central theme of this talk revolves around this idea of autonomous technology and the paradox of human-centered design. Or in other words, around the fact that as designers, we're just not trained for understanding and designing for human interaction with autonomous technology. We're not equipped conceptually, we're not equipped methodologically, and therefore, without such practice, we have also not developed a sensibility either for how to operate within this new level of complexity, where it is not exclusively humans that act and produce effects, and where design ideals such as user, product, functionality, etc., are no longer serving us well to craft relations between people and technology in a way that are responsible and sustainable in the long term. And so in this talk, I'm going to unpack a few theoretical concepts through the reading of 3 recent articles of mine where I grappled with these ideas, and I attempted to develop a vocabulary and eventually an international research program to address these issues. Co-performance is a concept that Lenneke Köijer and I introduced in 2018 in a paper presented at CHI. And what this paper does is attempting to expand on what in the social sciences is referred to as social practice theory, to revise notions of agency in current narratives of autonomous technology. And on the basis of that, we conceptualize how agency, and conceptualize specifically how agency is configured between humans and non-humans, interacting next to each other in the context of everyday life. What we do in the paper is to conduct an analysis of historic changes of domestic heating as a social practice. And we use this historical case to consider how roles between people and heating systems have shifted over time. In doing that, we are able to show that though this interplay between what we refer to as uniquely human capabilities and uniquely artificial capabilities have changed over time because of technology, giving rise to quite different roles for humans and non-humans, this interplay has always been central to performing domestic heating as a social practice. So when we were burning logs of wood to make fire, of course, our role was bigger. And today, instead, the sensors and algorithms of our smart thermostat are the ones doing most of the work. But it's still an interplay in which we learn from each other and perform, we carry out next to each other a particular set of activities necessary to that particular social practice. In this co-performance between humans and non-humans, both humans and non-humans are considered as necessary elements, and they both have knowledge and abilities, and they both encode some particular values. They both perform, carry out through their minds and bodies, an instance of what we come to socially recognize as a clearly identifiable practice. And it is in this performing next to each other, in this co-performance, that agency is actually expressed and effects are produced. And sometimes with implications, as we know, that are quite broader and have an effect on other social practices that come to be connected to the particular practice under examination, and then the implications for the elements that constitute them. Because as we know, life, real life, is quite messy, isn't it? So what co-performance does as a concept to determine within what boundaries or ecosystem our design has to be positioned to be likely to produce a particular effect is to help us move past an abstract and often totalizing idea of agency and position it somewhere in our life, not with humans only, neither just with products and services powered by intelligent technology, almost as they were something other, independent from us, ontologically autonomous, but at the nexus of this dynamic interplay between humans and non-humans, which next to each other with different, yes, historically changing roles, yes, but next to each other carry out domestic heating, energy saving, decision making, and many other social practices. And for this is an important conceptualization for much of the design work that we have conducted over the last years, because it frames agency as a matter of interaction, of crafting and sustaining relations and even relationships between people and technology. And it's important because then, as an interaction designer, I can begin designing with and for agency in the context of people's real lives, rather than assuming that agency is something that can be fully engineered at the system level and that's it. I can also, through such a concept, as an interaction designer, begin developing a different sensibility around questions such as what is an appropriate interplay? Who decides it? When is it decided? Can it be changed? Can it be negotiated or even contested? Can these changes and repairs take place in context at the time of use of the system, sensitive to that particular context? Building on this idea of co-performance, I then started to ask myself whether perhaps we should begin to take this interplay more seriously, and how in this more diffuse, expanded universe of design, where digital things are never finished, how should we conceive of autonomous technology as a design partner, perhaps? In a chapter published last May for the volume relating to things, which is a science and technology studies volume edited by Wilse, I analyzed cases based on projects we conducted in our group between 2015 and 2018 in the field of smart mobility, democratized manufacturing, and assistive technology for older people. All of these projects used quite different approaches to include autonomous technology as a co-ethnographer and a co-designer next to human designers. We used live logging intelligent cameras and bespoke sensors attached to objects of everyday use. We used open libraries for data visualization and even collaborated with our colleagues in computer science for expert machine learning. These examples are offered in the chapter as case studies of a possible modern human design practice, where I at first describe how we use this type of technology to gain access as designers to the ecosystem of relations in which humans and non-humans are entangled within particular social practices, and how this approach helped us surface elements of these social practices and ultimately generate insights that were previously either unattainable because invisible to the human eye, or unexpected because initially considered unimportant from a human observer's perspective. And then I describe how using autonomous technology in this way to open up these non-human trajectories and perspectives contributed a point of view that helped us problematize the design space, unsettle our initial assumptions, reveal our biases, demonstrate the problem to be more uncertain, more nuanced, or more complex than we have originally assumed. And so this type of modern human design practice led us to more open-ended ways of co-performing with autonomous technology. It invited us to integrate these uniquely human and uniquely artificial capabilities and performances in ways that, instead of reinforcing existing worldviews and therefore augmenting often our biases, aim to bring instead into existence things we could not think of before. In other words, helped us imagine alternative and possible, hopefully, better futures. And that is when the visiting professorship in Sweden and the collaboration with Johan Restrom came in. In an article we wrote for Design Issues by MIT on technology and modern human design, Johan and I expand on this idea of co-performance and modern human design practice beyond the one-to-one relation that we experience when we interact with the system. We were very interested in applying these ideas to the decentralized context of the current data economy, which is a context where digital things and services are assembled at runtime, constantly change, and sometimes with millions of people using them simultaneously, but for different purposes. And so we began to ask ourselves, what would it mean to attend to these co-performances in a decentralized context as acts of design? Could we consider them as diffuse, distributed, probabilistic acts of design in such a context? And what would that mean for how we look at matters of responsibility in design? Through an analysis in the text that we conduct of what is clearly a moment of crisis of design, none of these designers wanted to produce these effects. None of them was really able to fully anticipate the consequences of particular decisions. The designer of the like button in Facebook had never thought that that particular design decision would have in the long term produce an effect such as a post-truth society. So it's a moment of crisis for designers, and it's quite clear that there is some sort of contemporary paradox here with human-centered design if it's not serving us well in making these decisions and anticipating these effects. And the reason for the paradox is that human-centered design still maintains design ideals for forms and for processes where the only real agency present and accounted for in the design situation as I'm designing is the one held by what we refer to as the user. And the rest is just functionality that can be engineered. But then, of course, we cannot effectively care for humanity as designers and create inclusive and sustainable futures if we're not equipped to understand, to account for, and to anticipate our interplay with autonomous technology in everyday life, and the broader effects of this interplay in a universe of design that's expanded, that's decentralized, where things, digital things, are not just used, but made, assembled, not just by one user and not even by many users, but are the result of this emergent interplay of multiple users, multiple systems that are instantiated in multiple forms and with multiples, even conflicting intents. And so this is a huge challenge for designers. And of course, we don't get even close to providing a solution for that. But one of the tenets that we identify in this article to begin dealing with this complex challenge is the idea that when it comes to responsibility, then perhaps responsibility here is not about locating right response, but it's about persistently sustaining an ability to respond, to enable and invite response from the stakeholders, from everyday people, those are using and making at the same time these systems, and from the system itself. And not just at the point of design, but also later when people are actually interacting with the system. And so differently than accountability, responsibility, if we understand it as a future orientation, as an orientation toward future effects, cannot be fully engineered in the functionality of the system. It is not just about the fairest machine learning model or the most explainable algorithm, because in a decentralized system that is made, so to speak, in real time, there is not just one single intention or perspective that defines the outcome. And so it is instead also about the design of the relations and interactions that will enable people to situate, tune, and negotiate those responses, and to repair them or contest them if necessary. Future product service systems powered by AI must be designed, perhaps, and evaluated as responsive entities, not autonomous. Entities that have to be responsive to our shared moral values, but also to the evolving social norms and the nuanced interests and aspirations that people have in the specific context in which both people and system encounter and learn from each other. As you can imagine, after writing this article, we were left with a sense of urgency for, all right, we need to really fundamentally reconceptualize design and the way we teach it in our schools, in our design programs. We just barely scratch the surface of what the problem is. And so I was left with the belief that we really had to take a proactive role, that imagining and manifesting these alternative futures couldn't just be an afterthought. You know, writing an article and looking at what went wrong and how it could be done differently. So it cannot be just fixing things when they go wrong, or making technology socially acceptable without questioning it. It has to be a proactive effort. It has to start with asking why we should design something in the very first place. And if we are to design anything, to actually have the competence to embrace this complexity that we have been talking about. And so a few weeks ago, we launched Decode. And Decode is we call it post-disciplinary European research network to rethink design in the digital society, with a commitment to understand and shape these new realities with real-world impact. We're starting with funding by Horizon 2020 as an ITN, and we're currently hiring 15 PhD researchers with different disciplinary backgrounds. And the key idea here for us to really push the envelope is to have them working in proto teams, we call them. Having these teams of researchers from different backgrounds iteratively deployed in real-world settings in collaboration with our non-academic partners, cutting across sectors and domains to experiment with this idea of design-led ecosystems for the digital transformation of society. And this is a huge challenge, and it will be a huge challenge for the researchers and for us as supervisors. But it's really through this challenge that we hope they will be able to develop this new design competence and prototype their future design professions and roles. Over the course of the next 4 years, what we want to investigate and push the envelope of our topics such as human-machine futures, how to create this, how to craft these relations between humans and algorithms by bringing anthropologists and social scientists to work together early on in the design process with data scientists and engineers. Decentralized interactions, data-driven socioeconomic models, data governance, and future design practices. And what we want to do is to develop new knowledge and skills to advance design competence at each of these levels, but also, more importantly, across these levels, learning about the implications that a design decision taken at one level has for all the other levels. And then rehearse in practice, in real-world contexts, working on real-world problems, how these dependencies must be taken into account and configured in the organization of future design practices in order for these design decisions to really produce an effect. So yeah, this is a bit of a promo, I guess. The applications are open until the 14th of February. And we did receive quite enthusiastic responses, which is encouraging, because I think that in a bit all over around the world there is this sense of urgency in the field of design for really addressing seriously these issues rather than just fixing problems in an ad hoc fashion. And I think that also what really resonates is, besides the fact that we have excellent supervisors on board and we're feeling what is an apparently really strong need for such a program, is the fact that as a program we explicitly position agency as foundational to digital design today, to developing this new design competence. as was once the notion of function to industrial design. And the idea that this agency, this designing with, is not necessarily something we can control and prototype in a traditional sense, but something that we must learn to seed and care for. And what does that mean? Of course, is at the core of the program to develop. And I think that with this, I made it really in 30 minutes, and I just want to thank you for listening and open the floor for questions.
Thank you very much, Elisa. It was a very interesting presentation. And even for me, that I know partially some of this work already, but I really like to see all the pieces together and how they led to now the program. I think it's really nice. So the floor is open for questions. Deborah, please go ahead.
Hi, Elisa.
Hi,
it's worth waking up early in California.
Oh my God, you did.
What I want to suggest, especially reading someone like Bruno Latour and actor network theory, is that giving agency to non-humans is something that humans do almost by reflex. So we do it with the thermostat. We do it with door closers. We do it with all the technology around us. So I think that by natural extension, it's happening also with autonomous, non-human autonomous agents. So the question is, what do you think we have to actually deliberately learn in order to do that kind of interaction design? Or what do we have to worry about, that because we give agency so naturally to non-human objects, what do we have to be aware of or be weary of?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, so two things. The fact that as human beings, we tend to project agency, or even in some cases, personality, right, onto things is in a way kind of problematic when you're trying to stress the fact that agency is produced in the interplay between humans and non-humans. And it's particularly problematic in design because in a creative design process, using some of these techniques that attribute human qualities to non-human things is useful for the creative process, but it's not always the right way to go if we want to really tackle the problem of how to design autonomous technology in a responsible way. It might be very useful to come up with an interface that people have an easy way to relate with, but not when you want to look at a way of contextualizing that particular interface or that particular interaction in a broader set of other interactions. And that's where the focus on social practice theory for me becomes really useful compared to, for example, you know, a Latourian approach or a fluid assemblages type of conceptualization, because it really helps me think in terms of ecosystems, and it helps me think in terms of to put some boundaries, right?
But that's exactly Latour. That's exactly actor network theory. It's really the interaction, right?
Sure.
And the sense of ecosystem. But I agree that I think in interaction with non-humans, we produce agencies, but I think some of the problems with autonomous agents is that a lot of the agency is actually given by the engineering and the design already, and it's hidden. from the
Yes.
interaction, right? So
But
it's
it
the
doesn't
interaction
have
of the user versus the interaction of the designer, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it doesn't have to, right? So that we could find ways of manifesting that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very nice.
Other questions? I think I have a comment. Yeah, someone was saying something. Okay, so I just add something to this comment by Deborah. Also for me, when you say, okay, we should move as designers from, we should account for agency as it was functioned before, right? But agency in this, like as something shared, I think it's much more complex also as something to grasp, to understand, right? So it means that we need to have like a completely different education, and then
Yes.
yeah, so I think, yeah, indeed it's part of the program, I imagine, but then and also my questions are a lot about the formation of a designer, no? So the actual skills many times come from practice. So how do we see this understanding of agency as a shared property emerging also from practice? That is the most interesting thing for me to understand. Is it possible that it will come also from actually engaging with AI in practice? Do we get a sense of?
Yeah, and but that was also part of the reason for I mean, quite central to getting a program together where you know not only work with a limited and relatively homogeneous group of collaborators in one particular context, but bringing together a more diverse group of researchers and several non-academic partners that represent these sectors that are increasingly blurring because of this type of technology. And so this idea of proto teams is really crucial because it's really hard. And that was the feeling I had also after many years working on these things. It's really hard to just you need to engage. You need to engage with these problems in the real world. You need to be confronted with what does it mean to, make a particular decision at the level of the interface, and what does it mean for the type of value that will be fostered once people begin interacting with that interface across a decentralized in a decentralized context. And so it will be a bit of a balancing act between the PhD researchers being able to bring forward different conceptualizations, and some of them will focus a little bit more on that, of, for example, what is value in this data economy. Can it be multi-sided? What is value when it's not just money? And at the same time, having to really deal with real world problems and having to bring these ideas to application as they are developing, right? So that will be difficult. And I'm sure that there will be failures, but hopefully there will be also successes. But you're absolutely right. The context of practice, particularly for us as designers, is fundamental. Also because a lot of concepts and a lot of methodologies hold to an extent, and then it's the sensibility that you develop as you do things that really matters.
Yeah. Thanks. So we have a question from Roel, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Elisa, for this really inspiring, presentation, but also overview of your thinking in the past and towards the future is really interesting. I want to kind of respond to you were talking about this is being able through your work being able to better problematize design problems, and you were also just responding to Maria about like how to what is needed to really engage with I would say more of the politics of that's where a lot of this seems to go, or where a lot of my work also seems to be going. Where Inigo is also here. He just started as a PhD researcher. He'll be looking at like one of the questions is like what's the value of design methodology in like helping public institutions like integrates responsibly like data-driven technologies in decision making. So I was wondering in this this program that you're building, like you seem to be looking at a much different way of prototyping or context for design. Like, what are your ideas for like really engaging with actual institution, like the democratic institutions or contexts, and what are the challenges that you see?
Yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah, so of course we had to make choices, right? And so we will be probably what the very important type of work that you are doing that's more on the, I would say, on the policy level of design, right? That will probably be a bit on the fringe for us. What we are interested in, because it hasn't been done yet much, is how to take politics seriously when it comes to the actual interaction with the system, right? Can we imagine mechanisms of public deliberation as you use the system, right? And so, of course, there are processes and design methodologies that can be and need to be in place at the point of design, right? When you think about, what this should be and who should be accountable and who are the stakeholders that should be involved in the process of setting this up and so on and so forth. But our focus will be primarily on we have one PhD that is, for example, will be looking into an alternative to the terms of service contract.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be a different concept for the terms of service that's more along the line of a social contract that gives legitimacy to the company to operate. And another PhD instead will look more into what I was just saying is mechanisms for deliberation within a use time, so during the use of the system. But of course, I can imagine that connects very much also with what you're doing. So I just feel like there will be a lot of conversation to have in the years to come, and where also the hope is also to be able to open up the summer schools to other PhD students, because not just as our students, at least part of them, because I think it's important for people that work in this space to connect and have conversation.
Yeah, no, that sounds wonderful. I think there'll be a lot of those questions you're naming are quite similar to what we're interested in. So it would be great to move along together.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
And there is some enthusiasm about the summer school. So Elisa, you should also share and use AiTech channels to disseminate the summer school when it will be time. And David has a question, I think.
Hi, Elisa. Thanks very much for the talk. Thoroughly enjoyed that, and a lot of it resonated very nicely. I also feel I understand decode a bit better, which is very useful right now. I've got a kind of a curiosity about how we understand changes and shifts in agency. And this has come up a few times. From kind of designing some lightly autonomous systems and finding that as a designer, I was ascribing or trying to see more agency there than there really was, and falling into what Deborah was alluding to of kind of anthropomorphizing, rather than it actually being agency. But then I think there are times when the systems genuinely do push back, and there's something a bit generative and something a bit surprising and emergent that acts in ways that a designer might not be expecting, and it's very clearly agential. And it also makes me think a bit of OpenAI when they came up with their big language models, and they started saying, well, we're not going to put them out into the world because it's too dangerous. They would have too much of their own agency to change the way that humans communicate. So it feels like they felt there would be too much of a shift in agency there. So I'm kind of curious how we can chart that and make sense of it and see those shifts as they happen or before they happen.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good and really difficult question, Dave. Are you talking about being able to anticipate the shifts?
I guess it starts with noticing them, and then moves on to anticipating potentially.
I think that it's actually quite hard to anticipate them. But if you yeah, I don't have a good answer for you really. I think that if you slightly maybe shift conceptually from the idea of fully anticipating to what you said, noticing, and then sort of reflexively providing a way to tune, who does what. That might, when we zoom out of it, perhaps provide insights for a more radical redesign of a system at the professional level. So like sort of a reflexive cycle between everyday design practice, as I call it, and professional design practice. Maybe there is a way of noticing these shifts and what the trend is in these shifts. Perhaps there is something to be learned for how the system should be redesigned or more radically reseeded, so to speak. Also at the at the functional level. But that's just me thinking aloud with you. Yeah.
Because it feels a bit like, when we try and get people to go into the studio and start prototyping, a lot of that is about realizing the agency of the stuff they're working with and getting out of the idea of just straight imposing your will on the world. And it feels like there's a similar kind of process for making increasingly autonomous systems. And at the other end, if I think of like Uber drivers going on strike, it's very clear they're exercising agency there, and it's very obvious, but there's a lot of gradations in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is also a bit this, this narrative that we all sometimes inadvertently fall into, right? That the system it should be increasingly autonomous. And while in a way, technological innovation pushes in that direction, and it's also true that machines learn and much faster than human beings, right? Generations of technology are faster in retaining learning than generations of human beings. So in that sense, you have a bit of a mismatch between that pace and the enculturation of technology. But yeah, I think there are a lot of the conversation here will depend also on how you frame the narrative.
That was a difficult question.
It's a super difficult question, Dave. Let's talk.
Yeah, sorry, and it wasn't quite a question. It
No,
was
but
more
these are
something
the
I
fun
thought was
questions.
an
These are the
interesting
fun-
thing to bring up. I don't know.
These are the fun questions. You know, the one that makes you think. That's why you give talks and you want.
Yeah. And for me, personally, it's a very dear question. Like, especially what they was saying, like this thing of this urge of imposing our view into the world. No, it's what, like, in my perspective, we should try not to do. Like, try to develop, to be a bit more pragmatic and acknowledge where we are really trying to to impose our view and try to open to others. No. And I think there are some ways of doing it, but yeah, it's still really, really challenging. Is there any other question? Or even comment? Matt?
Hi. Thank you so much for your talk. It was really interesting. And I'm the one who said yes, please, to the summer school.
Yes, so.
It's me. I would love to. That sounds amazing. So I was just wondering if you could. You've touched on it throughout the presentation and in the questions, but I'm really interested in the difficulty of sort of the limits of language, or the challenge and ambiguity around the language of autonomous and agency. And I come from a philosophy background, and I work with roboticists at TU Delft. And when we say autonomous, we are talking about different things. When we talk about agent, we're talking about different things. So we've had to really sort of sit down together and say, like, okay, what do you mean? And then try and find a common language. So I'm wondering about the process of finding a common language. And then I was interested in if you might suggest that your research would come up with a new language, or like, should we keep calling this technology autonomous, or should we come up with a new way to describe this?
So my background is in the humanities, and so for me, language is so important because it really shapes the way we think. And you're absolutely right. You know, we use the same words to mean different things. Even when we say design, we mean different things. So when we say system, you know, it's a different thing. So there is something to be said about clarifying, when you work interdisciplinary, the meaning of the basic terms that you're using. But yes, we are hoping to in our own field, you know, for design, interaction design broadly defined, that includes also service design, to develop a new vocabulary. And so, you know, notions of co-performance, we're looking into notions of, and Dave will be in the lead there, multi-intentional interaction, right? So how do you conceptualize an interaction that is actually responding to a multiplicity of different and possibly also conflicting intentions? What kind of interface do you need to develop for that? This idea also of responsibility, they might not be exactly these terms, but we'll try to capture our learnings and the way that we are reconceptualizing particular aspects of the design process, also with a new vocabulary. That's the ambition. Yeah, I think it's important. Like, I hate user. I hated it forever, but I don't have another, you know, the only other word I can use is people, but it doesn't, you know, people could be the person that's interacting with the system. It could be the stakeholder that, you know, has a voice in determining what kind of system should be in place. in the first place. So yeah, we don't have an alternative for that.
Thanks.
Very, very important. Yes.
Okay, we might have time for one last question, if there is one. Or yeah, doesn't look like there are other questions. It was a very nice presentation, Elisa, and again, yeah, I think all the summer school programs will be very interesting for the network of AiTech. So we will share.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. The recording will be also. Sorry?
I just wanted to, thank Deborah and Dave and Madeleine and Roel for the questions and helping me think along with you on these really important topics. I hope that, as you said, with the program in place and via AiTech, that there will be ways to, bring our energies together on the very concrete projects.
So thank you very much again, Elisa, and to everybody for participating. See you next week.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.